Hello everybody, welcome back to Darwin Academy. This is Varsha Kulkarni. In my previous videos, I've discussed all the tissues with respect to plants, and today, like all of you would have guessed, we would be moving on to the animal tissues. Okay, so what are we going to discuss under the heading animal tissues? Based on the function, animal tissues are classified into four different types. All right, so they are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, followed by muscular tissue and nervous tissue. So let me repeat, based on the functions, the animal tissues are categorized into four different types. The first one being epithelial tissue, followed by connective tissue, and then muscular tissue, and the last one to be discussing, or that one we will be discussing, is the nervous tissue. So today let us get started with discussing more about epithelial tissue. Don't get worried about so much of text being written on the board. Let me take you through them one by one, and I'm sure by the end of the video, you'll all know what epithelial tissue means, where is epithelial tissue present, what are the different types, and where are these different types of epithelial tissues found within the human body. Note that we are discussing all these tissues with respect to human beings only. Okay, so today we are discussing about animal tissues. In that, the first one, that is the epithelial tissue. So, what do you mean by, or where do you find the epithelial tissues, and what do you think is the job of the epithelial tissue? Epithelial tissue is a tissue which covers the animal from the outside, and also within the organism, within the human body, there are different organs which are covered internally by a tissue, that is the epithelial tissue. And also, since we have many different organs within our body, all these organs have to be kept separate. So they are kept separate with the help of epithelial tissue. So we can say that the epithelial tissue acts as a protective tissue. It acts like a barrier between different organs within the human body. It also covering, all right, it covers the organs and cavities within the human body from the inside, and also on the outside we are lined by epithelial tissue. So whenever you think of any organ being lined by cells, you know that these cells together will form a kind of tissue, that is the epithelial tissue. Since they form the lining of any organ or organ system or different parts of a body, they should be permeable. That means they should allow easy exchange of gases and also other required materials into and out of these organs. For example, if the mouth cavity is lined by epithelial tissue, then it is the cells of this epithelial tissue are arranged in such a way that they are close to one another. If this is one cell and this is another cell, they are attached close to one another without leaving any intercellular spaces. Okay, and this kind of cells which are arranged without any intercellular spaces and that forms the lining of the mouth cavity is the epithelial tissue. Okay, I hope with this you have understood what epithelial tissue is. Okay, and if the epithelial tissue has to line different organs, it should be thin, isn't it? And also it should allow easy exchange of gases and materials, because if this barrier itself is thick and impermeable, then it is very difficult for exchange of substances from one organ to another. Alright. For example, if I take alveoli, what are alveoli? They are the air sacs within our respiratory system. You know that these are small microscopic balloon-like structures which are within our lungs, and when air rich in oxygen reaches our lungs, these alveoli are the ones which will where the oxygen will reach, and the alveoli are surrounded by many blood vessels which are very close to each other. Now, the epithelial tissue of this alveoli and also the blood vessel which are going close to one another should be very thin and should be permeable, isn't it? So that oxygen from the alveoli will diffuse into the blood vessel, and the carbon dioxide from the blood vessel will diffuse into the alveoli, isn't it? So that is what I mean when I say the epithelial tissue acts like a covering, okay, or the layer of the tissue which covers or lines any internal organs, and also it is permeable. That means it allows easy exchange of materials in and out of the organs. Not only inside, our body from the outside is covered by epithelial tissue. The best example is our skin. The skin is another type of epithelial tissue. I'll discuss that when I go to the types of epithelial tissue. So, how are these cells? How are the cells within the epithelial tissue arranged? Like I've already told, the cells, if I have a look at them from the top, then how will they appear? They'll appear like the pavement, the footpath that you have. In that you will see tiles which are attached like this without leaving any intercellular spaces, isn't it? If I look at the epithelial tissue from the top view, then I can see many cells which are attached without leaving any intercellular spaces. Okay, so they are tightly packed, they form a continuous sheet of cells. Okay, and there are no intercellular spaces between the cells of the epithelial tissue. But you know that these cells are to be arranged on some sheet, isn't it? Or some membrane, right? So that is the basement membrane. Now, I was saying that if I look at the epithelial tissue from the top, then this is what I would see. But if I see or if I observe the epithelial tissue, a section of the epithelial tissue, of course under the microscope, from the side, if this is the top view and if this is the side view, then how would it appear? There should be a basement membrane on which the cells, thin layer of cells should be arranged. Okay. So, here is a quick diagram. These are cells which are compactly arranged, okay, on a basement membrane. Okay, this is a fibrous membrane and it is also called as the basement membrane, on which cells are arranged one beside the other, and they are thin and there is no intercellular spaces between them. So this is about the arrangement of cells within the epithelial tissue. So we have discussed the epithelial tissue, the arrangement of cells within the epithelial tissue. What is meant by epithelial tissue? Acting as a barrier between different organs or lining different organs or acting as protective layer. And also we have spoken about what it means for the cells of the epithelial tissue to be permeable. Okay, with this basic knowledge, we will see where all we find epithelial tissue. Like I said, wherever you hear the word lining, that means some tissue has to line different organs, isn't it? From the inside, from the outside, so that itself is epithelial tissue. So, epithelial tissue is found as a lining in the mouth, in the nasal cavity, within our alveoli. Go back to the example that I've discussed at the beginning of the session. Then, lining of the blood vessels, lining of the esophagus, that's the food pipe, The food pipe is lined by epithelial tissue, the blood vessels, the alveoli, the mouth, the nasal cavity, they're all lined by epithelial tissue. Also, our skin is an example of epithelial tissue. But you might be wondering, we can see our skin, but I've been saying that epithelial tissue is microscopic. Then, does this fit in together? That will be sorted out when I talk to you about the types of epithelial tissue. Moving on to the next bit of our topic, that is the types of epithelial tissue. Like you see here, there are four main types of epithelial tissue. They are simple squamous epithelial tissue, stratified squamous epithelial tissue, cuboidal epithelial tissue, and columnar epithelial tissue. Now, what is the simple squamous epithelial tissue? It is the basic or the simplest of epithelial tissue that I've explained here. You find a basement membrane on which thin cells are arranged one beside the other. But what do you mean by squamous? Squama means sheet of cells. Okay? It is as simple as that. So, it is the simple sheet of cells. I have drawn a rough diagram here. I hope it is visible to all of you. But where can you find these simple squamous epithelial tissue? They are found in the linings of the blood vessels and also the alveoli. Okay? Moving on to stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Stratified meaning different layers. When many layers of such thin cells of the epithelial tissue are placed one on top of the other, it forms stratified squamous epithelial tissue. The best example is skin. Did you understand that there are many layers of cells and as a result it is visible for us? Alright, but rest all of them they are microscopic because they are only thin layer of cells. But here stratified meaning multiple layers of sheets of cells will form the stratified squamous epithelial tissue and skin is the place where you can find stratified squamous epithelium. Okay? Moving on to cuboidal epithelial tissue. Cube meaning in three-dimensional view, it is like a square in a three-dimensional view, isn't it? So, cube-like cells. If cells, animal cells, are placed one beside the other without leaving any space between them, and these cells are cube-like in nature, then such type of epithelial tissue are called as cuboidal epithelial tissue. So, mind you, there's a difference between the way these two look. These are cube-like. You are having a look at the tissue from the side. So, on the basement membrane, you have cube-like cells. Okay. So, what is the job of cuboidal epithelium? It provides support to the organ where it is present. It is found lining the kidney tubules. You learn more about what tubules are in the kidney in your grade 10. Alright. So, at the moment you remember that the cuboidal epithelium provides support and as a result it is found lining the stomach, pancreas and also kidney tubules. You know tubes are pipe-like things. If these pipes are much more tiny, we call them tubules. Alright, so they provide support and that is cuboidal epithelium. Moving on to the final bit, that is columnar epithelium. Column or pillar-like. So, here the cells should be column-like, just like here. But note that the nuclei are almost at the base, very close to the basal membrane. So, on the basal membrane, if the cells that look like columns are attached one beside the other without leaving any space between them, then such an epithelial tissue And also, mind you, this epithelial has to line different organs, okay? So, such epithelial tissue is called as columnar epithelial tissue. Why should columnar epithelial tissue be present? It helps mainly to secrete and also to absorb. You know that within our small intestines and large intestine, there is lot of absorption of digested food happening, isn't it? And also water, right? So, this happens or this occurs because of the presence of or absorption within the small intestine and also the large intestine is because of columnar epithelium. Columnar epithelium also helps in secretion. But where do we see this? Especially in our respiratory tract. That means our respiratory system, especially within the trachea. Also, all right. That is the windpipe. All right. So along the windpipe, if this is the windpipe, and all along it, along this, you find columnar epithelium or columnar epithelial cells that are lining this trachea. Okay. And what happens in case of only respiratory tract is the columnar cells will also have a few hair-like structures which are called as cilia. So, you find hair-like structures along at the top of this columnar epithelial cells. This act as broom to sweep up the dust. So when we breathe in air, if by chance the dirt or the dust enters or microorganisms might enter the trachea also. So at that time, all the dust and the dirt has to be swept up from the respiratory tract, isn't it? So that is done by the movement of these cilia. So the cilia beat upwards and push all the dirt outside and upwards. So particularly in the respiratory tract, we have a slightly modified epithelial tissue which is called as the ciliated epithelial tissue. All right. So I hope this is clear to all of you. And also, you might have come across a word called as glandular epithelial tissue at the fag end of the topic epithelial tissue. But what is meant by glandular? You know, like I've been saying that epithelial tissue is a layer of cells. If this layer of cells will go inwards like this, okay? So, I'll just draw it for you. Then I hope it will be easy for you to imagine or understand. See, there is a straight layer of cells. Okay, let me take this as an example. You have a straight layer of cells. Okay, this one. Now, if that layer is pushed down, okay, something like this. Am I making sense or is it total nonsense for all of you? So, if this straight layer is pushed down and it forms like a gland-like structure, you have the layer of cells lining this, isn't it? So, there is no change in this. Only that the straight layer has gone down, it has shown a dip and then it has come up. So, this forms like a glandular like structure, and if these cells secrete some substances, then this is called as glandular epithelium. So let me quickly revise. We are discussing about, or we have rather started discussing about animal tissues today, especially tissues within the human body. Based on the functions that they do, they are categorized into four types: nervous tissue, muscular tissue, connective tissue, and epithelial tissue. We have discussed more about epithelial tissue. We said that epithelial tissue acts as the barrier or protective layer. It covers organs. It also keeps different organs separated. The cells of the epithelial tissue should be thin, okay, so that they help movement of substances into and out of the organs in which they are formed as lining layer. And the arrangement of the cells is such that there are no intercellular spaces. They form a continuous sheet of cells and they are tightly packed. And all these cells are resting on a fibrous membrane, which is the basement membrane. So we have discussed how the epithelial tissue looks like from the top and also from the side. Mind you, these are all microscopic in nature. Now, where do we find epithelial tissue? We find them lining the esophagus, the blood vessels, the alveoli, nasal cavity, mouth, small intestine, kidney tubules, respiratory tract, so on and so forth. And also our skin is a type of epithelial tissue. There are mainly four types of epithelial tissue. Simple squamous epithelial tissue, that means there is a simple thin layer of epithelial tissue. We find them lining in the blood vessels and in the alveoli. Stratified squamous epithelial tissue. There are layers of such sheets of cells, and these are found in skin. Okay, or rather our skin is made up of stratified squamous epithelial tissue mainly. Cuboidal epithelial tissue mainly helps provide support within the organ where they are present. So they are found lining the lining as a layer of lining within the stomach, within the pancreas, within the tubules of kidneys. Columnar epithelial tissue helps in absorption and also secretion. They are basically found within the small intestines, large intestines, and also there's a special mention of the respiratory tract, okay, where the columnar cells, the column meaning pillar-like cells, have cilia, small hair-like structures which help push the dust and the dirt upward, and this forms the ciliated columnar epithelial tissue. And also, if this layer of cells are not straight and they show a dip, and then this forms a glandular epithelium. So basically, if there has to be any secretions produced, then they are produced within such structures which are formed by this basement membrane going inwards and coming up, forming a pocket-like structure. With this, we have completed epithelial tissue. I hope you have all understood. If you have not, please do let me know in the comments so that I can refine the way I explain in the upcoming videos. Thank you all. Have a lovely day.